I'm Jo, and I guess I'll just go straight in. So, a few years ago, I came up with the term "nobjective," and that's a word to describe the sense that most men have that their experience is the default and that they're truly objective. And it came to me after one of those interminable online conversations. I suspect everyone here will know the form. It was a man felt it was his duty to explain to me why a preference for frilly pants was more indicative of womanhood than my vulva. And in a way, it doesn't matter what the subject is. Men are trained to see their experience as universal. And whether that's passing the legislation upon which civil society rests or coding the new reality of the digital world, an objective worldview creates a hostile environment for women. And technology is often spoken about in hallowed terms, as if it's a disruptive force that challenges power relations, democratizes information, and revolutionizes commerce. But in essence, the digital world, as it exists today, is just a reflection of the status quo. And in this talk, I will argue that an objective technology entrenches male dominance. Dr. Richard Bartosch, now Professor of Computer Games at the University of Essex, was one of the first people to develop a digital world. And this was the multi-user dungeon, or MUD. In an interview for the BBC, Dr. Bartosch explained that the computing pioneers of 40 years ago had a shared set of what he terms liberal and open-minded beliefs. He recalled, when you get people together with the same worldview, attracted to the same technology, in the same places, well, it isn't just a case of culture develops around them, it's a case of they all got there because they have the same culture. Now, looking at the real-world profiles of those who dominated computing at this time, and indeed still do today, it is clear that by people, Bartosch means men. And their shared values, and crucially their shared blind spots, have created the ideal conditions for the sex industry to flourish online. So from so-called sugar daddy dating apps, where rich older men pay for the company and often the sexual favours of young, hard-up women, or to streamed online abuse to order, access to what was once the preserve of red light districts has been put into each of our hands in the form of mobile phone technology. So it isn't, in my view, a sort of cabal of patriarchs who were sitting around plotting how to get one over on those uppity women. It's more that their collective and objective worldview makes harm to women inevitable. And there have, of course, always been so-called moral panics about technology. Indeed, 2,400 years ago, Plato warned that writing would undermine human memory. And maybe he was right. But the difference is, at least when something is written down, it's passive. It's open to interpretation and indeed challenge. What makes the digital world more concerning is that in many senses, it captures and then massages our opinions through quite opaque algorithms that literally, in the case of Facebook, trace our likes and our dislikes. In the digital world, humans are reduced to a set of data points, which are quickly then analysed and sold to advertising companies. So essentially, the very fabric of what makes us each unique has been opened up as a rich seam for those wishing to make a profit. Our minds have been monetised, they have been mined, and they have been digitally detached from our material existence. When signing up to Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, or Instagram, most of us fail to read the small print of this digital social contract. And interestingly, many of the architects of the best-known sites themselves abstain from using such platforms. In a 2018 speech, Sean Parker, the founding president of Facebook, was clear that social media is designed to be addictive, to give a dopamine hit with each click. So he explained, it's a social validation feedback loop, exactly the kind of thing that a hacker like myself would come up with, because you're exploiting a vulnerability in human psychology. The inventors, the creators, understood this consciously, and we did it anyway. And it is known that social media has real psychological effects, physiological effects on the brain. When a sexual element is added, in the case of pornography, the results are personally devastating for women and catastrophic for society. So it's known that masturbating to pornography triggers a neurochemical rush that is addictive. Pornography rewires the brain's reward system to no longer be triggered by, for example, the feel of another person's skin, or even by sex, but by pornography itself. And there is a growing body of compelling research that suggests users become desensitized alarmingly quickly, turning it into what researcher Pascal Emmanuel Gobry refers to as novelty-seeking machines. It is necessary in order to sustain sexual arousal that content must shock the pornography user, hence the rise in extreme pornography, including violence, child abuse, and bestiality. Now, for pornography users, the progression towards breaking taboos is inevitable, as shock itself is stimulating. And there is evidence that this shapes attitudes and behaviour, not in that it just normalises extreme forms of misogyny, but also because it causes brain damage. Now, that sounds alarmist, but there is sound research to back it up. Neuroimaging studies have shown that addicts develop hypnofrontality. That's a technical term for an impaired frontal cortex. The frontal cortex is responsible for our executive function, our decision-making faculties, and crucially, stopping us from acting on impulse. So the studies underlying these findings were conducted on adults, and I believe the impact of high-speed, hardcore pornography on the developing brains of children is being seen in today's young adults. Addiction to the digital world, in all of its forms, has left those who have come of age online detached from their bodies and from one another. Leaving aside the trauma caused by exposure to pornography, the normal processes of making sense of the world and of forming a stable sense of self have been disrupted. There is no longer any space to thrash out ideas or to experiment with belief without censure. And there is so sort of unable to escape into a truly private space and with a permanent record of every blunder. Is it any surprise that young adults are often desperate to show their tribal affiliations online? And they are really absorbed by a mania to silence those who threaten their sense of themselves. So to the men of the intellectual dark web, the so-called council culture is blamed on feminized teaching, on overprotective mothers, on left-wingers in academia. But to my mind, it seems far more likely that censorious behavior of the I generation is due to a crisis of confidence caused by the monetized mind-body split. And there is clear evidence that young people are suffering. As psychologist Professor Twenge explains, more US adolescents and young adults in the late 2010s versus the mid-2000s experienced serious psychological distress, major depression or suicidal thoughts, and more attempted suicide. These trends are weak or non-existent among adults 26 years and over, suggesting a generational shift in mood disorders instead of an overall increase across all ages. It seems more than coincidental to me that those under 26 were born shortly before the iPhone and high-speed internet. I believe this generation have literally been brain damaged by exposure to the digital world. And the reality of these physiological and social harms, psychological, are of course belied by the straplines of man-made social media sites, which all emphasize openness and connectivity and intimacy. Even the pornography giant Pornhub likes to advertise itself as bringing a worldwide community together. But make no mistake, the digital world severs our connections with one another. How humans deal with this is most powerfully illustrated by the different ways that men and women now express sexuality. My approach is feminist, so I want to address the impact on women and girls. I spoke to a young woman who wanted to be known as Ginger, a young lesbian feminist who is recovering from a heroin addiction. Ginger has performed online on the platform OnlyFans to make money. And just to explain, OnlyFans is a newish UK platform where users can pay to see content, most of it pornographic. Ginger is a really clever woman, and she recognised that her choice wasn't freely made. She told me, "There's so much competition, women need to be doing more extreme things. The massive emphasis on looks means that they are editing themselves to be unrecognisable. The women advertise themselves like products." And this is borne out in the advertising copy that the women write on their OnlyFans accounts, where they explicitly put a price on the intimacy of their everyday lives. So I'll read out a couple of these descriptions. "This will be a platform for my amazing fans who want to know me on a personal level. The public will not be able to find this content on any of my other social media accounts. It will be raw, it will be real, it will be unedited. I like to call it Caitlin's reality show." And "Come and see the more personal side of me. Exclusive content you won't find anywhere else, posted daily. Keep checking your inbox for even sexier pictures and videos." On UK sites like OnlyFans, it is now no longer possible to point to an external pimp or trafficker. So men own the means of production, that is, the platforms on which women sell themselves, but effectively those who profit financially are also products, the women and girls themselves. So it's impossible to tell whether the performers have been forced or coerced, but it does seem likely that for the most part there is an element of choice, albeit from a paucity of options, none of which work in women's interests. So many women and girls who perform have so absorbed the misogyny of the digital world, they are disconnected from their own sense of sexuality. They are, in effect, their own pimps. And it is well known that the splitting of mind from body is a response to trauma, one that is very common amongst women learning to cope with the abuses of prostitution. And it could be argued that the objective reality of the digital world has made this a normal state of being, and to some extent we all now sell ourselves as products. Ginger explains more about what keeps women selling on OnlyFans. She says, "They learn to rely on the approval of men to boost how they feel about themselves. That's all they need after a while. We're taught so much to rely on male approval that it is a boost to know that men find you attractive enough to buy your nudes, even if you aren't attracted to them. That's the kind of behaviour that becomes addictive, and it makes women do more and more extreme things." Sites like OnlyFans aren't niche, they're very mainstream. Over the first few weeks of lockdown, an additional 1.85 million new accounts were set up on the platform. Before lockdown, on any given day in the UK, there were over 7,000 people on Twitter driving traffic to the OnlyFans platform. An estimated 2,545 of these were under the age of 17. So this is effectively the grooming of children on a massive scale. In a BBC documentary, an OnlyFans fans performer referred to as Sasha.
Give you one more minute, sorry.
Oh gosh, okay. Refers to as Sasha, explains how she was drawn into the sex industry. Sasha sent images of herself to a boy at school in the belief that it would make her popular, and that, in her words, maybe he'd fall in love with her or something stupid. Rationalising that she might as well get paid, Sasha described OnlyFans as kind of like a way to say fuck you to all the guys who have hurt her. At the time of filming, Sasha was making just enough to scrape by and was waiting for emergency accommodation from her local council. She described the progressing from Snapchat to OnlyFans to escorting and then prostitution. It seems there is now a digital conveyor belt into the sex industry. And pornography sites where women and girls prostitute themselves pose a problem for feminists, as it isn't possible to point the finger at an abusive man, but rather at a disembodied and objective male system. Effectively, the abuser has reached through the medium of the digital world into the minds of young women. It seems that very likely that, as with other practices which are based on vying for male approval, such as wearing makeup and removing body hair, creating pornography will soon become a cultural staple, a normal part of women's sexual expression. Lockdown has been a technologist's wet dream. Deprived of intimacy and human contact, people have turned online. Arguably, it has accelerated the changes that were already beginning to take hold. In the early patriarchal civilizations, women were regarded as chattels, and the public sphere was off limits. In many respects, this is true of today's digital world. Women exist online as products to be assessed and bought by male consumers. Those who dare to express opinions cannot fail to be aware that they are doing so in a man's world, where the objective worldview of the creators rules supreme. One of the earliest written laws from the Middle East decreed, if a woman speaks out of turn, then her teeth will be smashed by a brick. This bears a striking resemblance to today's threats towards women who challenge male power online, who are routinely told to die in a fire or simply deleted. Indeed, this happened to 60,000 feminist Reddit users earlier this week. Their community was wiped out without warning. Those dedicated to discussing the abuse of women remain live. Women in the brave new world of the technocrats exist at the sufferance of the male creators and an objective worldview. In the near future, there will be very few people who remember life before the digital realm captured our minds. The idea that sex should be private, about intimacy, and about shared pleasure is already becoming a quaint anachronism from a bygone age.